John's Gospel, it is, for a time reference, is now the second year of Jesus' 3-year ministry. It's the time of Passover, so the people are really now thinking about what Pharaoh had done to the people long, long ago and put them into slavery. And so this celebration of Passover is celebrating the Exodus, the rescue of God's people by God. So this is foremost in their mind. And so there are a lot of people from all over the region coming to this area. So there's no surprise that there are so many people following Jesus at this point, because they've been hearing of all the things he's been doing, the miracles, the healing, and they want to be a part of that. And so there's incredible amounts of people following. And so this thought of keeping in mind the oppression that their people were under Pharaoh, and now the oppression they're experiencing from the leaders in Rome, this Jesus guy who's doing all these healing and teaching and preaching, he's making good leadership qualities, isn't he? And so they want to take him as their king. But the overarching theme in the Gospel of John is to let us know who Jesus is. Who Jesus is. John wants to make sure that we're just not seeing this person that's doing all these miracles, and that he could make a good king. John wants us to know deeply who Jesus is. And so in this story, God's abundance springs out of this perceived scarcity of resources. So there's this, as I say, there's this huge crowd gathered. In John's Gospel, it says 5,000 people. In Mark's Gospel, it says 5,000 men and women and children also. So there really could be up to 15,000 people in this crowd. It's a vast number of people that have come. And Jesus says, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him. And he himself knew what he was going to do. So Scripture is making it clear that Jesus isn't asking this question just to have a brainstorming session to find the answer. Jesus has the answer, but he's wanting to see the faith of his disciples, the faith of Philip in the midst of this. Can Philip see past his ability to see God's abundance in this? He wants his disciples to see beyond the perceived scarcity and then call on the power of God to answer in abundance. Jesus asks, "Where are we to buy bread?" And Philip's response doesn't even touch on the where, because he figures we don't have enough money anyway. It doesn't matter if the bakery's down the street, right? He says it's going to take 8 months of wages to pay for all of this bread. So he doesn't even answer the question where. We don't have enough money in the first place. What are we going to do? So this dilemma is not dilemma of not having enough money, the daunting size of the crowd, and that focuses the attention on the magnitude of this issue, of this problem that they're seeing, the scarcity at hand, the lack of resources, and the size of the crowd. So it quickly becomes pretty clear, from the human perspective, there's no answer. There's all these people, we have no resources, how are we to feed them? Conventional wisdom leads us to no answers, no solutions to feeding the crowd of this size. You can almost envision Jesus standing there with his disciples going, "Come on, fellas. You've been with me for 2 years. You've seen some stuff. You've seen me doing these miracles. Think beyond your own capacity. Think beyond your own capacity and think and call upon God's abundance." abundance. Because the disciples don't even turn to Jesus and say, Lord, you've done all these other miracles. Can you not do this one too? They don't do that. They're focused on the scarcity, and they miss the fact that Jesus says, where will we buy the bread? He doesn't say, where will you buy the bread? He says, where will we buy the bread? Together, how shall we solve the problem? Philip is only seeing his inability to solve the problem. He missed the whole we thing. He's looking at, I can't fix it, all by himself. And then Andrew, bless his heart, sees a small boy with his lunch. 5 barley loaves, so they're going to be about yay big around, and 2 fish. I think if I was a disciple standing beside Andrew, I'd probably flick him on the shoulder and go, nice try. Do you see the size of this crowd? Really? You think there was some eyes rolling? I suspect there was. And even Andrew was skeptical at what he was saying, because he says, but what are these among so many people? He's offering up a partial solution, but he's skeptical as well. Let's face it, there's 15,000 people here. And there's 2 fish and some barley loaves. Imagine his buddies were saying, well, nice effort, Andrew, but have you seen the size of the crowd, dude? I suspect it would be kind of like being on the sinking Titanic and trying to bail water with a teacup. Right? It's just too much and too few resources. But Jesus sees it as enough. Jesus sees all of this as enough. He knows through the glory of his Father that the ordinary can be changed into the extraordinary. And it's always been God's will to keep people fed. In the wilderness, the Israelites never went hungry. Every day they had enough manna for each day. When they got tired of manna and asked for something else, God gave him meat every single day to go with the manna. There's a story in 1 Kings about Elijah going to the widow lady and her son. And he says, would you bake me a loaf of bread? And the lady says, I only have enough flour and enough oil for 1 loaf. And he says, okay, go and make 2 small loaves then. Give the first one to me, and you and your son eat the second loaf. And he tells her this. He says, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will never be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry. She was faithful to Elijah's request, and the story goes on that jar of flour and the jar of oil never ran out. There was always resources for what she needed. Jesus sees the boy's lunch as enough. He takes the bread, he gives thanks, and he distributes it to all of them to eat. And it says, until they were satisfied. So it wasn't just enough to get away the hunger pains, but it was enough to make them full, to be satisfied. And then there was still 12 baskets left over. Jesus transformed the ordinary, an ordinary boy's lunch, into something extraordinary. This is a miracle of abundance. And it's amazing in John's Gospel, there are 2 miracles of abundance. The first one comes in chapter 2, and that's when Jesus turned the water into wine. And now here, he's changing a boy's lunch into enough to feed a massive crowd. It's intriguing to me that the miracles of abundance that appear in John's Gospel have to deal with wine and bread. and an abundance of both. The elements of our Holy Communion, the elements of God's sustaining grace and salvation in abundance, never running out. John wants us to know who Jesus is. He's more than just this amazing person with leadership ability. That he can take whatever there is and make it more than enough. The Lord is a Lord of abundance, not a Lord of scarcity. And he's beckoning us to look beyond our eyes of scarcity and to call upon his abundance. So here's the take-home message for today. Way too often we see in our eyes scarcity. Scarcity of resources, money, energy, time. We see the scarcity in that. And God wants us to see his abundance through his eyes. Can we trust God enough to provide what we need? Not what we want, and maybe not what we think we need, but what God says we need. So here's a personal story. Back in 2007, money was very tight for me. My first husband had passed away, as you know. And I was going to the First United Methodist Church, and I had promised one of the pastors and made a statement that I was going to support 2 kids to go to camp, because that is near and dear to my heart, for kids to have the opportunity to go to camp. And so I pledged enough money to send 2 kids to camp. Right after I had pledged that, 2 days later, my aging Ford Explorer, the computer board went out and I had no headlights. And so the amount of money that needed to fix that truck, because obviously I can't drive in the dark without headlights, was pretty much the same amount of money as I pledged to the church to send kids to camp. And I only have enough to pay 2. I don't have enough to pay 2. I made a choice. And I gave my money to the church. Because kids going to camp is way more important than headlights on my car. 2 days after I made that, and I dropped the check off to the church, I picked up my mail, and I can't make this stuff up. There was a letter in the mail from the U.S. Bank. I had sold my house that my husband and I had the year prior in 2006. And they were doing an audit on accounts in the bank. And they found that I had some escrow still in an account. Do you know how much that was? Enough to put headlights in my car. I can't make that up. He provided. I had other needs, but the needs that I needed were fulfilled. The timeline was incredible. God provides us with the resources we need when we can stop looking at the scarcity and see God's abundance in it. And he will provide for that. So when we get caught into a mode of going, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough energy, I don't have enough funds, that's the moment we've got to stop ourselves and say, God, where are you in this? Provide your abundance in this. When we take our tithe and our offering, and I raise those plates up at the altar, I say a prayer over those funds every time. God, multiply this in a way that flows online. He does. He does. And so in John's gospel it says, then Jesus took the loaves, and when died, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. God is a God of abundance, not of scarcity. Scarcity is our view, not God. We serve a God of abundance. Our challenge is to look past our scarcity and call upon God's abundance and have faith in his abundance. For that we say, Amen.
Amen.
Our hymn is